Hello and welcome to Flavors of Sicily. I'm Claudia Catalano. Tonight we're going to make sort of grandmother food Sicilian style dishes. The dishes that we're making tonight are things that I consider Sicilian, but they're not really 100% authentic to the island of Sicily because my grandmother was an immigrant. She came to this country when she was very young, so she learned how to cook in the United States. She couldn't afford saffron, so she would use just a little bit of tomato in the risotto instead, just to give it that color. So these are things that are authentic to my family and my grandmother. They are definitely Sicilian, but they're kind of more like Sicilian American. I'm going to start caponata, which is the first thing I'm making. This is a Sicilian eggplant. The first step is to cut up the eggplant and salt it. So caponata is very much a Sicilian dish, and the defining characteristic is the sweet and sour flavor. So it has a little sugar, it has vinegar, it has golden raisins, but then it has like olives and capers. So you have all these really contrasting flavors that come together. And it's something that you serve at room temperature. It's great made ahead because the flavors sort of meld. So you can make this and keep it in the refrigerator for a week. I just kind of eyeball, you just want to coat it with salt. So this has to just kind of sit and weep for about 15-20 minutes. So this is just some kitchen wisdom for you too as I'm going through. This is not a Sicilian way to cut an onion. This is just a way to cut an onion. What I do, I lob off the sprout end of the onion, and you keep the root end intact because that is acting like a little hinge that's holding all your layers together. Okay, and then I peel off the outer skin, and I'm a righty, so I have my knife in my right hand and the onion with the root end on my left hand. And you're going to make a series of parallel cuts, but don't go all the way through the root end. You want to leave that intact. And you put your cuts closer together or farther apart depending on what size dice you're looking for. And then I turn it with the root end away from me and use the tip of the knife to make perpendicular cuts, again not going all the way through the knife, through the root. And then I turn it back the way it was, and you have a nice, neat dice. 3 stalks of celery. As far as like what size to cut things, imagine that you want it to pieces to kind of fit onto a fork. I'm just going to cut the celery in half lengthwise and then chop it up. These are pitted Sicilian green olives. So the olives just get a rough chop. Okay. So the recipe calls for a can of diced tomatoes, but because we're here with the bounty of late summer, I used fresh tomatoes. Now you can see all these little beads of sweat. They kind of have like water droplets on them. That's what you're looking for. And I'm going to grab another towel and just sort of blot these dry. So the salting is really key because it absorbs less oil. Because a raw, fresh cut eggplant is like a sponge. If you have a cast iron pan, that works great. This is a wonderful big straight-sided skillet. I'm using just extra virgin olive oil. I call for a specific amount in the recipe because I want you to be successful, but if I'm doing it, I would just kind of eyeball it. And I think I'm gonna put in, maybe I can fit it all actually. So because this was already salted, I'm not gonna add more salt right now. And you can see how much it really shrinks as you're cooking it. All right, so I'm going to take this out here. There's too much to saute everything all together. We kind of have to do the eggplant first and then move on to the next vegetable. All right, so now we're going to add some more oil to the pan. And we're going to add our onion and our celery. And whenever I saute onion, no matter what I'm making, I always add some salt. And that is because the salt, again, like the eggplant, it draws out the moisture of the onion and it kind of helps it to steam and soften up and become translucent. I'm going to add my tomatoes. This is white balsamic vinegar. I'm going to eyeball half a cup for this. You could also use a red wine vinegar. Then I have 3 tablespoons of sugar. You can also start off with a little less than 3 tablespoons. I might do that actually, and then taste it and see what we think. Here are the golden raisins. I like putting those in at this stage so that they kind of plump up. Okay, so I'm going to put the eggplant back in now. And then, okay, we have the olives and the pine nuts and the capers. I love pine nuts. That is essentially it. And then at the end, we add some torn basil leaves. Basil is always best torn, not chopped, because the leaves bruise very easily. And then the capers. Let's see here. So as you're cooking this, you, of course, one of the main pieces of advice I have for you as a home cook is to taste before you call something finished. You know, taste it and see, does it need a little more salt? Is it too sour, too sweet? Not every eggplant is going to be the same exact size. Not every onion is going to be the same exact size. So as much as I try to write a foolproof recipe, I can't know for sure exactly how much eggplant you're using. And so then if the eggplant is a little smaller and you still put in the 3 tablespoons of sugar, it might come out a little too sweet. So that's why I'm glad I didn't put it all in, because I think it tastes good the way it is. So that's it. That's caponata. Next on our menu is, have you ever seen the movie Big Night? They make this dish that is called timpano, and it's like a container that's the size of a drum, and they make a pastry crust, and then it's layered with like pasta and meatballs and vegetables and hard-boiled eggs and cheese and salami and all these things, and then more pasta and sauce, and then it's like closed up on top and baked, and it's a very theatrical dish, and then they unmold it, and it's always like this, you know, moment of truth as to whether it's going to come out or not. Anyway, there's a big scene in the movie about it. So this dish is like my grandmother's version of that, which is much more down to earth and approachable and not fancy at all. It has some similar elements though, but instead of pasta, it's a risotto that's layered in with some meatballs and cheese and peas, but you can really put whatever you want in the middle. The idea is that it's a casserole with a layer of risotto and then a layer of yummy things and then another layer of risotto, and then you cut into it like a casserole. The first step with making this dish is you have to make a risotto, which is a dish in itself, right? And you could just eat that. But this is an example of how my grandmother would sort of spend days preparing and cooking for, you know, Christmas or any kind of big family holiday. So for the risotto, we're going to use a combination of butter and olive oil to sort of toast our rice. And I also have some hot chicken stock in this pot here, because one of the defining techniques about risotto is that your stock is slowly added little by little to your rice, and it's stirred. And so the stock has to be hot so that when you add it to the rice, you're keeping the momentum going of the cooking process. You're not slowing it down every time you add it by adding cold stock. You're adding the dry arborio rice, which is a short grain Italian rice, directly to the pan with the butter and oil. And the idea is to give it a little bit of a toastiness by cooking it in this way before we start adding liquid. So now I'm going to add just about a half a cup of crushed tomato. So again, this is hot chicken stock. My grandmother would have made her own. I don't always make my own, I will be completely honest. So this is a part of the night that's going to get a little repetitive because risotto is a little bit of a labor of love. When you have a properly done risotto and you spoon it onto a plate, it should pool, it should puddle a little bit. It shouldn't kind of stick up straight. So once this is getting close to being done, we're going to add pecorino romano cheese. Okay, I haven't added any salt except for a tiny bit with the onion. I'm going to add a little more. My grandmother, when she made this, she would use this like old beat up giant lasagna pan. But when I wrote this recipe for the Globe, I decided to do it in a springform pan because that way you can unmold it and sort of present it like a cake. We're going to pour half of it in. Doesn't that look good? Okay, so I'm going to put gloves on because this is the funny thing about things my grandmother used to do that my mother and I used to joke about. She would make perfect little meatballs only to then like break them up and put them in here. She said it had to be done that way. I don't know. So I'm just going to sort of use my hands to break these up. And the meatballs are, as I said, there's breadcrumbs, and the breadcrumbs are moistened with milk. It's also good with buttermilk. I've used that because it kind of helps tenderize the meat a little bit too. So if you're going to have a little bit of sauce, you can just sort of layer that in here too. The sauce that was used to cook the meatballs. Peas, just frozen peas.
Pretty.
Okay, so the cheese is, this is a mixture of Italian fontina and sharp provolone, which is again another very salty, pungent cheese that is very characteristic of Sicily. She used to use American cheese in a lot of things that she made. And it was so good because it just kind of melts.
You mean the orange kind?
Not the orange kind. It was the Land O'Lakes white American cheese. You know that? She used to get it from the deli counter. So it was like a stack
of processed food, right?
I know, and that's like what I grew up with. I mean, she used nice cheeses for certain things too, but she always had that white American cheese.
Oh my gosh.
And it does kind of create almost like a sauce when it melts.
It's oil.
So there was something really comforting about it. Yeah.
Probably.
So this would then get wrapped in with foil, covered with foil. And this would go in the oven, 350 for about 30 minutes. But like I said, you could take it to this point and put it in your refrigerator. Just let it cool down a little bit before you put it in there. But this would be a great thing to make ahead of time for a big family gathering. We just like run a knife around the edge before you release it.
Oh, that looks so good.
Isn't that cool?
Wow.
Looks great.
Anybody complains they don't get to eat.
And there you have it. A little, and I forgot, I was going to do this on all of yours, and I forgot to do the little parsley.
Well, there it is.
So I'm getting some sort of a double boiler going here for the dessert. I learned this from Jacques Pepin, and it's the only way I crack an egg now, is to always crack an egg on a flat surface, not on the edge of a bowl.
Why?
Because if you crack an egg on the edge of a bowl, you're forcing little pieces of shell into the egg, which can end up in your egg, and also if there's like any bacteria on the outside of the shell, that's going in the egg. It just makes it kind of stays, you know, like plate glass that shatters but it stays in place because of like safety glass, they call it. It's like that on the egg. So if you just crack it, it's cracked but it's still kind of intact, and then you can just, you know, separate it with your fingers. So always crack an egg on a flat surface. The alternative, what I see a lot of bakers do when they're going through like dozens and dozens of eggs at a time, is they crack them together, which is equally as good. Semifreddo. It's essentially kind of like an ice cream, but it's also like a frozen mousse. So I said this in the recipe, it's like imagine if your ice cream fell through a cloud on the way to your plate. So we are going to heat our eggs, and the reason we're heating them, it's to make them safe to eat. You know, the eggs can have bacteria, so you want to heat them up to a certain point without cooking them, just to kill any potential bacteria. And we're going to do that with sugar and a pinch of salt. Whenever you're whipping up eggs, It's pretty common to add a pinch of salt, and that is because salt helps to denature the proteins in the eggs and makes them more homogeneous, and so you don't have like big clumps of like white that are that never break down. And we're just heating these up to dissolve the sugar. I just stick my pinky in there. That's how I test if it's ready. It's hot, and you can't feel any sugar crystals anymore. So that's how I know it's ready. You whip the cream first, and then transfer that to a bowl so that you can keep it chilled. The whipped cream gets folded in with the whipped eggs. So you have to have your cream cold and already whipped. This is 2.5 cups, I believe, of heavy cream. Yep, heavy cream. But you want it to be pretty well whipped. You know, sometimes I say soft peaks. I might have said soft peaks. That just kind of means like it holds its shape. You want to make sure you get every bit of cream here. So rubber spatula. So this feels very hot to the touch still. And by putting it on this mixer, we're aerating it and we're cooling it at the same time. We want it to be cool enough so that when we're folding in our whipped cream, we're not melting the cream. Okay. That's going to go for a while. This dessert is going to end up in a loaf pan. We want to line the loaf pan with plastic wrap so that we can like pull it out. Press it into all the corners. And I put this in the freezer so the pan is nice and cold. So we're going to pour a little bit of this into the whipped cream and just use a rubber spatula. Folding is a technique which you see a lot in recipes, and I think a lot of people are like, what the heck is folding? It's a motion where you're taking your rubber spatula down the middle of the bowl and then half turn. And then you turn the bowl the opposite direction. Does that make sense? So I'm turning the bowl. I'm just doing this. Same motion, but the bowl is taking a quarter turn every time I do it. And it's a way of gently incorporating aerated ingredients without losing all the air that you work so hard to get. Lemon zest, which I love lemon zest in lots of different things. This is one of those microplanes that I was mentioning. And I have a way that I like to do this too that I always try to explain to people. Instead of taking a lemon or lime and like rubbing it back and forth, looking at it, rubbing it back and forth, looking at it, I like to think of this as like a globe with strips going down from like North Pole to the South Pole. And so I start at the bottom and I do one stroke, move it a tiny bit, like I'm rotating it, one stroke from the South Pole to the North Pole, all in one stroke. If you rub back and forth, you're going to get to the white part really soon, and that's not the flavorful part of the lemon. So the lemon zest goes in, and then you put in some raspberries and pistachios. I'm going to save a little bit of these. And so the other thing with using frozen raspberries is it helps to keep this mixture cold as you're trying to get it into the freezer. So that's another reason why I like using the frozen ones. So that's about what it should look like. With, you know, the eggs would have been a little thicker, so this might be a little soupier than it should be, but close enough. And then it goes right into the loaf pan. It's really a simple dessert, and it's so elegant, and you will impress all your friends if you make this. Okay, into the freezer she goes. And this is what a finished one looks like. I did it. I did like the fake TV thing. The magic of television. See how that just comes out? Impressive, right? Yeah. So it's very pretty and festive looking. So you could absolutely sub out whatever kind of berry or nut you prefer. I like the colors of raspberry and pistachio, but blueberry almond would be good. You know, well, thank you everyone for joining me with this cooking demonstration on the flavors of Sicily. We made some lovely dishes, if I do say so myself. We made Sicilian Caponata, which was the sweet and sour antipasto. We made a timpano composed of risotto with meatballs and cheese and peas. And then we made a raspberry pistachio semifreddo, which is a frozen mousse. So I hope everyone enjoyed it, and thank you to my studio audience. Thank you.